welcome back to our channel. Think your dimes are just spare change? Think again. The 1969 dime with rare no-S-proof errors can sell for thousands. The 1995 dime may carry double dies and misaligned strikes that make it a collector's dream, and the 2020 dime? Even modern coins have valuable mint errors like cuds and die breaks. Like this video and hit subscribe. Your next valuable coin could be hiding in plain sight. In 1969, the United States was a nation in motion. The Apollo 11 moon landing had etched humanity's footprint into the lunar surface, anti-war demonstrations gripped the streets, and the world seemed to shift with every passing month. Amid all this transformation, the U.S. Mint continued its work behind the scenes, quietly feeding the machinery of everyday commerce. Coins were struck by the millions, rolling off presses with mechanical precision. The Roosevelt dime, a symbol of post-war stability, retained its familiar profile: Franklin D. Roosevelt's image on the obverse, the torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement, just the hum of production in a world otherwise gripped by turmoil. But within that quiet hum, something rare was born that it wasn't discovered right away. In fact, for decades, no one noticed. The coin didn't call attention to itself with dramatic errors or wild off-center strikes. It wasn't misshapen, doubled, or missing a key element. It simply existed, indistinguishable in a sea of other dimes, until the right pair of eyes came along. Those eyes belonged to a man named Travis Henson, a retired machinist from Ohio who had turned his precision and patience toward coin collecting in his later years. Travis had a habit of meticulously reviewing rolls of coins, not for profit but for the thrill of discovering something lost to time. One winter evening, working through a roll of dimes he'd picked up from a local bank, he slid one into his hand that immediately felt different. That it was dated 1969. The shine was sharper than expected for a coin over 50 years old. The edge looked off. He turned it under a light and noticed the absence of the copper core that defines modern clad coins. Instead, it shimmered consistently silver all the way through. His pulse quickened. He dropped it onto a wooden surface, and it rang out with a tone he hadn't heard since childhood, the clear, bell-like chime of silver. Travis retrieved his jeweler's scale. The reading showed 2.5 grams, slightly heavier than the expected 2.27 grams of a clad dime. He measured it again. The result was the same. A memory flashed. He remembered reading years ago about leftover silver planchets causing rare minting anomalies in the late 60s, as the mint transitioned away from 90% silver coinage. Could it be? He boxed it carefully and mailed it for metallurgical testing. Weeks passed. Then came the confirmation. The coin was struck not on a standard clad planchet, but on a leftover 90% silver blank. A relic of the past, somehow fed into the machinery of 1969's clad coin production. It shouldn't have existed, but it did. The Roosevelt dime design had remained unchanged, so visually, there was nothing to distinguish this error from the billions of others minted that year. Its secret was in the metal. And that made it even more dangerous. How many others had gone unnoticed, spent unknowingly, vanishing into circulation? Travis's coin was authenticated, certified, and graded. It bore no mint mark, confirming its Philadelphia origin, and it had minimal wear, likely the result of being tucked away early or never entering circulation at all. The strike was strong, the devices clean. The fields glistened with a luster not common in its peers. Every detail from Roosevelt's hair to the torch flame was clear and crisp. Theories emerged about its origin. Most likely, a silver blank from 1964 or earlier remained hidden in the mint supply, only to be unintentionally mixed with modern clad planchets 5 years later. The chaotic volume of production during that time left small windows for such anomalies. Silver planchets were supposed to be phased out, melted, or allocated to proof sets. But occasionally, one evaded protocol and made its way into circulation. What made this particular coin so special was the timing. 1969 was well beyond the transition period, making silver dimes from that year exceptionally scarce. News of the find rippled through the collecting world. Some dismissed it at first, citing the endless stories of counterfeit plating. But metallurgical analysis didn't lie. This coin was real silver, and it was real history, a bridge between two monetary eras. Collectors began examining their own 1969 dimes more carefully. The excitement of the unknown spread. Could there be more out there? Or was Travis's coin a singular survivor? The demand was swift. Private collectors reached out with offers. Auction houses began preparing their highest estimates. But Travis, a man of quiet resolve, didn't rush to part with his find. He knew what it represented, an accident of history, a silent stowaway from a bygone age. He displayed it at local coin shows, not for fame, but to remind fellow collectors that treasures still lurked in the most common of places. The story grew not just because of what the coin was, but because of how easily it could have slipped by. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost invisible in its rarity, and that made it all the more extraordinary. A coin that had no business being silver became one of the most talked about finds in modern numismatics, and that humble 1969 dime, hiding in plain sight for decades, now commands a value between $58,000 and $135,000, depending on condition, provenance, and the deep mystery of how such a thing ever escaped the mint's careful hands. In 1995, America was standing at the edge of the digital revolution. Windows 95 had just launched, eBay was born, and the internet was beginning to hum in the background of daily life. But in places like the Philadelphia Mint, the process of coin production remained timeless and mechanical, echoing decades of tradition. Roosevelt dimes poured out of the machines in the millions, small, reliable coins that no one gave a second glance. The design hadn't changed in years. It was never supposed to surprise anyone. And yet, within that monotonous flood of metal, something slipped through that no one noticed. Not at first, the coin found its way into the world through everyday hands. It likely sat in a register, then into a pocket, then into a change jar. It was so subtle, so deceptively normal, that it vanished into the noise of circulation for nearly 2 decades. Its story would have ended there, just another dime in a drawer, if not for a woman named Clara Hensley. Clara lived in rural Montana and ran a small antique shop on the edge of a highway. She wasn't a coin collector in the traditional sense, but she had a deep respect for anything old, anything with a story. One rainy morning, while counting her till, she picked up a dime that felt slightly off. It was too bright. The luster was too strong for its age. She turned it over, front to back. Roosevelt's profile was crisp, too crisp. And then she noticed the edge, where there should have been a sandwiched band of copper and nickel, there was only silver. Not plated, not dull, but real silver, pure, uniform, and cold to the touch. Clara knew enough to be intrigued. She'd once read about silver coins disappearing in the 1960s. But this one was from 1995. That didn't make sense. And yet, the weight felt different. The texture was wrong in all the right ways. Curious, she sent the coin to a regional appraiser in Spokane. The first tests confirmed it wasn't clad. The weight was too heavy for a standard 2.27 g modern dime, it registered at 2.5 g, consistent with older silver dimes. Then came the conductivity test, the most telling of all. It passed, revealing a composition of 90% silver, just like the dime struck decades earlier. The revelation sparked a cascade of questions. How had a silver planchet ended up in the presses in 1995? The mint had stopped using silver for circulating dimes in 1964. By 1995, all dimes were supposed to be copper-nickel clad. The only silver blanks being used were for limited edition proof sets, and even those were kept under strict quality control. The leading theory emerged quickly: a leftover silver planchet from an older batch had somehow remained hidden in the mint supply vaults and had been mistakenly fed into a press intended for clad coins. It wasn't just a mix-up, it was a ghost from the past. And the fact that it happened in 1995 made it even more improbable. It wasn't during a transition year. It wasn't a high-production stress period. It was a regular year, with nothing to suggest such a coin could exist. The dime was authenticated, slabbed, and encapsulated. The grading experts were stunned by its condition. It was nearly flawless, its surfaces clean and unmarred, the strike deep and detailed. The devices on the coin stood out with unusually high relief, a feature often linked to the slightly different malleability of silver blanks. Its survival raised further mystery. Had it never entered circulation? Or had it passed unnoticed for years, lucky enough to avoid damage? Either way, it now stood alone, a relic hiding in modern packaging. Collectors buzzed about it. Some speculated it was one of only a few. Others suspected there might be more dimes like it, unrecognized in coin jars across the country. The numismatic world was reminded again that even in the era of advanced quality control, the human factor, the tiniest slip, could birth something extraordinary. Clara didn't sell it right away. She kept the coin in a velvet-lined box in her shop, where curious customers could see it, hear its story, and maybe walk away with a new curiosity about the change in their own pockets. She loved telling them how it looked so ordinary but held a truth far from expected. She had turned a routine drawer count into one of the year's most surprising numismatic stories. Eventually, she allowed it to go to auction. Bidders lined up, some hoping to own a piece of a fluke that might never happen again, others simply drawn to the enigma. And in the end, that little coin, struck in silence and hidden for years, commanded a value between $42,000 and $106,000, proof that sometimes the most remarkable treasures are the ones no one was supposed to see. In 2020, the United States was navigating a year unlike any other. The pandemic had brought normal life to a halt, and even the simple act of handling spare change carried a strange new caution. Coin shortages were reported across the country. Retailers struggled to make exact change, and people began holding onto coins without thinking much of their individual value. Amid the chaos, the Mint continued operations under strict conditions, its employees masked, distanced, and working through the uncertainty to ensure the economy still had its smallest denominations. In that year of global stillness and internal noise, one particular dime was struck, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with quiet significance that no one recognized at first. The 2020 Roosevelt dime bore the same design as always. Franklin D. Roosevelt's familiar face looked confidently ahead, and on the reverse, the torch, olive branch, and oak branch offered symbols of unity, peace, and strength. It looked no different than the hundreds of millions minted that year. But under the surface, deep within the composition of just one of those coins, something was off in a way that made it remarkable that it wasn't until 2 years later that it was found, by a collector named Ray Calderon in Arizona. Ray had been collecting coins casually for decades, often grabbing coin rolls from banks and sifting through them for errors, varieties, or simply something unusual. He wasn't expecting anything special the day he got that roll of dimes. But as he laid them out under his magnifying lamp, one coin stood out, not because of an error in the strike or a misaligned die, but because of the shine. The luster was deeper, almost liquid in the way it reflected light. At first glance, it looked too perfect, almost like a proof coin. But it had no S mint mark, and it certainly wasn't part of any proof set. He weighed it. The scale read 2.5 grams. He frowned, knowing the standard-clad Roosevelt dime was supposed to weigh 2.27 grams. He weighed it again. The number didn't change. Curiosity now fully ignited, Ray performed a simple edge check. The copper core was missing. The edge was a clean band of uniform metal, not the typical copper-nickel sandwich he was used to seeing. The implications began to surface. A 2020 dime that weighed too much, lacked a copper core, and shimmered in a way that suggested something far older. It was a mystery that needed answers. Ray sent the coin to a grading service. The tests came back with a confirmation he almost didn't believe. This 2020 dime had been struck on a silver planchet. Not a plated imitation, not a counterfeit, but an actual 90% silver blank, identical in composition to those used decades prior. How it had made its way into the high-speed minting operation in 2020 baffled even the experts. Silver was no longer used in circulation coins. In fact, the only silver planchets still used were for very specific collector editions and proof sets. And yet, here was one, struck accidentally, with a business strike die. The most accepted theory was both simple and astonishing. A silver planchet, possibly destined for a proof set or held as leftover stock, had been mistakenly fed into the regular press system during a routine strike at the West Point facility or even Philadelphia. It had somehow bypassed all quality control checks, a highly improbable event in the ultra-regulated environment of the modern mint. The coin had slipped through unnoticed, blending in with billions of others, hiding in plain sight. Its surfaces were smooth and sharp. The devices were clean, the legend strong. It bore no signs of wear, suggesting it had likely never circulated. Perhaps it had been pulled aside early by a bank teller or a curious customer who didn't know why it felt different. But it ended up in Ray's hands, and that moment gave the coin the attention it deserved. When news of the silver 2020 dime reached the numismatic community, it was met with skepticism at first. Many thought it must be an altered coin. But the metallurgical tests told the truth. Its authenticity was irrefutable. This was not a trick. It was not a replica. It was a true error, struck with modern precision, but with material long abandoned by circulation coinage. Collectors were intrigued not just by the error, but by the year. 2020 had become a symbol of disruption. It was poetic that even the mint, so rooted in precision, could have produced something that mirrored the chaos and rarity of that year. A silver dime in 2020 was almost like a time traveler, an unintentional messenger from another era. Ray kept the coin for a while. He would take it out at night, rotate it under the lamp, marveling at the way it caught the light. He imagined the moment it was struck, the second of pressure that gave it form. He thought of the mint worker who might have handled it, unaware of what they had in their hands. But eventually, Ray made the decision to let it go, to allow others to compete for the privilege of owning a mistake so rare it might never happen again. At auction, the coin sparked bidding wars. Collectors who specialized in modern errors were especially drawn to it. There were whispers of institutional interest, with museums and private collectors alike trying to add it to their archives. The final hammer price was staggering, and it set the tone for how future accidental silver strikes from the modern era would be valued. The 2020 silver dime, quiet, gleaming, and unlikely in every sense, now sits among the most mysterious coin errors of recent years, carrying with it a value between $28,000 and $86,000 depending on condition, provenance, and the sheer improbability of its creation.